Does the oboe belong in the marching band? Well, historically, the oboe has been in the marching band since the 17th century and was later removed. Why was it removed? Well, in today's episode, we're going to be discussing why the oboe deserves to be in the marching band. So if you want to find out these answers, make sure you stay tuned to the very end. What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to another episode of Zeke's Oboe's very own podcast, episode number 2, Why the Oboe Deserves to be in the Marching Band. Now, in preparation for this video, I had to do a lot of hard research and digging to discover information about this topic, because believe it or not, there's not a lot out there on the oboe in the marching band. It was around in the 17th century, and then it kind of just disappeared, and we don't really know what happened. So that's what I'm going to do today, is talk about all of that and unpack the mysteries behind the oboe in the marching band. But before we dive into the video, I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Donekis. Donekis is a fun music trivia game that you can play with all of your friends. It's a mobile game where you can discover hidden musical stories that are often not told. The way the game works is by gathering at least 2 players, where one is the master and the other is the investigator. The investigator's job is to figure out the musical mystery by asking yes or no questions. It's sort of like 20 questions. The master responds to all the questions with a yes or a no, and can even prompt you in another direction if you ever get too far off. You also have Mr. Rigoletto to accompany you on your journey to give you helpful hints and extra clues. Make sure to ask him for the hint, since sometimes he can get a bit angry. There's over 50 different music stories that you can play with others. Each story is unique and fun to play, but it's up to you to figure out each. So, if you're up for a challenge, try it out today for free. Now, back to the podcast. Now, before we really dive into the history of when the oboe played in the marching band, why don't we use the oboe nowadays? See, when I was in high school, I spent most of my years playing in the marching band. Although not on the oboe, I still had fun, but I think it would have been more fun to play with an instrument I was really good at and enjoyed playing. In fact, if I knew what I did nowadays, I would have advocated for oboes to be in the marching band. And here's why. So when I did some research on why the oboe doesn't play in the marching band, this was the biggest reason. Its reeds are dangerous, and it's sometimes even be considered a weapon. Whoa, that's a little harsh to call an oboist's reeds weapons. I mean, we have to play them every day, so how can our instruments be a harm to the instrumentalist? That doesn't make sense. But according to some people online, they say that when the oboe reed is in your mouth and it gets bumped around or you're jostled when you're marching, it can like poke you in the mouth, and because the reed's kind of sharp, it can harm you. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's an issue that can happen with any other instrument, especially other reed instruments like saxophones and clarinets. I mean, someone could just hit your instrument and it hits the roof of your mouth, and that's a bigger mouthpiece that can harm you. But okay, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. You know, the reeds are fragile, and I agree with that, but I don't know if that's the main reason. If this is true, why were they able to do it before? That's another fair question that we have to address. Digging into some more sources, people were saying that the instrument itself is also fragile, or it can't produce a loud enough sound in comparison to the brass or saxophone. You're kind of left with a useless instrument that has a lot of problems, because the oboe is kind of temperamental. Too hot or too humid, the pads will start to stick, or it just doesn't sound good on the oboe and the pitch is all over the place. Or if it's too cold, the keys might stick and you can't even play half your notes. There's those issues as well. So this is what I learned online of why the oboe doesn't play the marching band. And that is what we are told today, that the oboe just isn't a smart idea. It's a useless instrument and has a lot of issues that won't work for it in today's marching band. Now, this may be true, but we gotta dive a little bit deeper. So I actually found this thesis written by George L. Bailey, and the thesis is called The Organization and Administration of the Marching Band. And he states that the oboe has been around in the marching band since the 17th century. So, to quote him, he says, "The beginning of the military band in its modern role occurred in France with the oboe band of Louis XIV. Grown out of this band, the French and German bands during the first part of the 18th century consisted of 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 horns, 1 or 2 trumpets, 2 bassoons, and 1 bass trombone. The English then added the clarinet to these bands. The English bands started making progress around 1750 and 1770, but had no competitors. And then later on, he says that the Revolutionary War was a culmination of the rudimental drumming, which incidentally has not changed much since then. And the military bands around that time consisted basically drums, fifes, and then some woodwinds. So they kept adding on. But this Revolutionary War was something that was kind of a change the oboe's existence, because it's almost as if during this war, for the ease, they just used drums and fifes. Later on in the thesis, we started to see times when more instruments were added back on, and it just seemed like the marching band was getting bigger and bigger. Because by 1806, in the band of Salem Light Infantry, they consisted of 5 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 1 trumpet, 1 triangle, 1 bass drum, 1 French horn, 2 trombones, and 1 serpent. So obviously bassoons were still used in this time. There's no clear definitive answer of where the oboes were, but bassoons were used at least until 1806, if not later. So I'm assuming in other regions or other bands, the oboe was used during this time too. And each band, if you can do some more digging on your own, was a little bit different. Every band could consist of different instruments than another band, and I think the most popular band during this time was Louis XIV's Hautboy band. And a little bit about this was that this consisted of 3 oboes, bass oboe or bassoon, and the word hautboys from the oboes of Louis XIV came to signify the combination of military instruments as well as the musicians themselves, regardless of the actual instruments used. So this was the start of what was replicated around the world. Louis XIV's oboe band, or instrumental band, being mimicked around the world. And it slightly changed, and the US definitely changed it a lot. And basically every country was copying other countries. The US added drums and fifes, so other countries started doing that. And then they started adding brass in the 1834. And by 1853, it was basically a brass and woodwind band. They're all together. Somewhere during this time, it's kind of unclear where the oboes went, because they were very prominent in the 17th century, and then they also disappear. By like the 18th century, 19th century, no oboes. I don't know what happened, but why would this occur? This is a valid question that I came across, and I knew that the oboes had a historic mark in the marching band. Because according to Bailey's thesis, by 1889, that was finalized marching band instrumentation list. So there were no oboes or bassoons in it, but basically all the other instruments were there that we kind of replicate to this day. So something happened right before this time where the oboes just stopped existing in the marching band. And you might say that, well, maybe there was a lot of changes happening with the oboe itself. Perhaps. I mean, all these instruments were changing during this time. I'm sure the reeds might have been changing, or maybe the weather didn't permit the oboe to be outside as it used to be, because back then the oboes were a little bit hardier. They weren't like our modern day instrument with so many different keys, metal keys. They were actually a little bit about the same size, but they had less keys and it was just wood. And the reeds were thicker too, because they're bigger. Maybe that wasn't the issue. I'm not really sure, but I know that something must have happened in between here. There's not enough evidence for me to come to a conclusive decision of when they just disappeared. And this is kind of why I think the oboes still deserve to be in the marching band, because they have a legacy here. And for some reason, they just kind of dispersed or no longer used in the everyday marching band or everyday marching band group. That's potentially what it looks like, you know? But this is where my research came to a dead end. I was at loss for words because there's nothing about the oboes playing after the 1800s. They kind of just disappear. So something happened, and because the oboe in the marching band wasn't around, there's not a lot of documents during that time either, so I can't prove if they were there or they weren't. Of course, I'd love to believe that they were, but I had no evidence. And so I was almost at a dead end. And then I came across this instrument, the Sarrusophone. So I'm going to include a photo here so you can see what it looks like. And basically, it mimicked the saxophone. So you can see how it kind of had the brass color, and it might have even had the same fingerings for some of the instruments. The key difference was it used a double reed. So all these instruments, and there's alto, soprano, tenor, bass, and a contrabass, and this was used during the 1850s. According to Wikipedia, this is where I found the bulk of my information about this, because this instrument also had a short lifespan too, for no apparent reason. The Sarrusophones are a family of metal double-reed conical bore woodwind instruments, patented and first manufactured by the French instrument maker Pierre-Louis Gautret in 1856. The instruments were intended for military bands to serve as a replacement for oboes and bassoons, which at the time lacked the carrying power required for outdoor marching band. And they were named in honor of Pierre-Auguste Sarrus, and he was the chief musician of the French army of the 13th Infantry Regiment. So like I said before, all these different regiments had different bands, and they consisted of different instrumental groups. And this is an instrument made in honor of him. So what I believe happened during this time is that this instrument was going to replace the oboes and bassoons for whatever reason, that they didn't have enough sound power, which is what some sources told me, that maybe the oboes weren't loud enough and this was going to be the replacement to it, so that way they could fit in and blend with the marching band. And this is a valid case, I believe. If the saxophone was a loud instrument and this was basically mimicking the saxophone, this should replicate and fill in the sound of the oboes. So this is just one theory that I came across, that the oboes and bassoons lacked sound and power. So this was the replacement to that and a solution. So this instrument was basically the replication of the saxophone, but specifically for double reeds. Adolphe Sax actually sued Pierre because of that, and he lost, thankfully. Otherwise, this instrument would have died probably like that. But even though he won, this instrument didn't take off like the saxophone. And you'd be surprised that some of the composers that wrote for the Sarrusophone, we have prolific composers like Debussy and Ravel, and even Sousa. They all wrote for the Sarrusophone, but it kind of just vanished like the oboe and the marching band. But there are some pieces to this day that if we were to play them correctly, like Paul Ducas's Sorcerer's Apprentice, the contrabass solo is supposed to be a Sarrusophone, not a contrabassoon. It was intended for this instrument. So we have instances where there's music dedicated to the Sarrusophone that we just kind of changed and stopped using. And what I found was that the Sarrusophone seemed to have died by the 1930s. The production just stopped. People weren't inclined to make this instrument anymore because there was just not enough usage, and there's a lot of adversity of people not liking these instruments, because although the saxophone had a lot of adversity and pushback, this probably had more because it was something newer and it came later after the saxophone. So it had that working against it. Maybe time itself was working against it, because it only had probably like from 1850 to 1930, we're looking at 80 years at most, and it's kind of just died out. So one could also say that it's the reeds. The reeds were the issue. See, the reeds from the beginning. This is why oboes can't be a marching band, the reeds. But I don't think that's the issue, because the reeds are a problem for every woodwind instrument. And if you know how to work with the instrument and just adjust the reed to make a different sound, more of a, I guess, a louder sound, because it's a marching band, you don't have to scrape as much, so it might not be as delicate. And I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is that there's something going on during this time where people felt like the oboes or Sarrusophones didn't fit in with the outdoor marching band for some reason that is unclear. I don't know what happened, but it's just kind of unclear. And I'm even going to put a link of what a Sarrusophone sounds like so that you can kind of get a listen, so that you kind of know what we're missing out on. We need to bring it back. It was even used in the University of Illinois. They had like a little quartet or octet for Sarrusophones during this time, and it just vanishes like the oboe. So had I known that this instrument was around, I would have definitely advocated to have oboes use the Sarrusophones in the marching band. I think that's a hardier instrument. You don't have to worry about the temperature. The reeds are the only issue, but I'm sure with practice, that's something you can adjust to. If you were to use a reed and march to it every day, you'd kind of get familiar with the tendencies and how to play with it. I'm sure that's something they had to overcome back then, and that's something we can overcome nowadays. It just seems so foreign to us now that we're like, no, the oboe and marching band is a bad idea. And like I said before, an optimistic oboist only dreams that the oboe was still used from the 1700s all the way up until the late 1800s. But there's no supporting evidence for this. And there's really untapped market and history that of the oboes and the marching band that I feel like people haven't really researched or know about. And to be honest, I think I'd have to go into archives to really delve deep into this topic, because there's a lot of untapped history and information out there regarding the oboe that I feel like we need to uncover. So if any of you guys know of any information out there that I didn't talk about, or something you've heard and want to share with us, please leave it in the comments down below. And if there are other resources to look out, please link them down below as well, because I would love to do more research and really uncover the truth about this. Because after hours of research, I'm disappointed that the oboe just vanished. And that's why it's not in the marching band today, because if we were just go by history, it would be there, but it is gone. And I think because if we were going to go historically with how the oboe tunes the orchestra, then historically the oboe should be in the marching band. And that is my final claim. So I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast episode number 2. If you want me to do anything else related to oboe, please comment down below, and any other suggestions. I'm going to do one more final episode specifically to the oboe, and then we're going to go to a different series. So if you have any other thoughts, please share with me in the comments down below, and I hope to see you in the next podcast episode. Until then, have a wonderful day and take care.